Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Subtxt Office Hours. I'm your host, Jim Hull. I love great stories and I'm obsessed with narrative theory. I used to be an animator for Disney Dreamworks for 20 years, and then I left that to start my own company called Narrative First, and then eventually developed an application called Subtxt. Today, I'm going to go over what does meaning mean? All right, so I actually get this question quite a bit, because a lot of times in the copy for Subtxt or any of my writings on Narrative First, I will talk about how important it is to write a meaningful story. And then either people get offended or they don't understand what the heck do I mean by a meaningful story. So what I mean is that if you look at Poor Things, that's a meaningful story. If you look at Fast and Furious, that's a meaningless story. If you look at Casablanca, meaningful story. Transformers, meaningless story. And on and on and on. So the idea is that the stories that last with us, that actually get nominated for Best Picture or Best Screenplay, they always have some sort of meaning at the core center of them that they're trying to convey to their audience. It's an artist who has some way of seeing the world that they want to convey to the outside world. And you can think of it kind of like a message, or probably the more accurate way to think of it is an argument. But if the story isn't saying anything, then it's meaningless. If it has a purpose and it's trying to argue a particular point of view, then it has meaning. Now in Subtxt, there's this thing called the Storyform that contains the meaning or the message of the piece. That's the narrative framework that drives everything. So if I come in here, this is Subtxt Story Central, and I go down to the Storyforms. These are all of the Storyforms. So Killers of the Flower Moon, meaningful story. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, believe it or not, meaningful story. Anatomy of a Fall, best screenplay. Come on. There's something really deep at the core center of it that it's trying to put forth. It's very nuanced, which is why it won the Oscar for it. But all of these stories here, these are all meaningful stories. Even Griselda, across a whole series, had something that it was trying to put across, like an argument. So when you destroy something in the effort to prevent something else from happening, everyone bears the tragic consequences. That is the argument of the entire series. It's kind of like the message of the series, and it's proven episode to episode. So actually, this is a great one. I'll just use this one as an example. Now, this argument that you'll see here at the top that I just read is actually generated. I use AI to generate this based on the narrative structure underneath. So sometimes it might be a little awkward. This is one area where I would definitely need to go in and fine tune it a little bit more. But this one's actually clear enough that it actually makes sense. So if you've seen it, I'm going to spoil it. So the idea is that the meaning of the story is the spoilage of the entire narrative, because that's the whole point of the thing. So if you haven't seen it and you want to be surprised, maybe hold off on this. But the idea is that when she works to always prevent something, that's her core thing. She doesn't want her family to get hurt. She's always against everybody else and doesn't like when people take things from her. Well, she even goes to the point of having herself locked up to keep her children safe. And then everything ends in complete tragedy. It's a complete tragic narrative. So you can see here, this is the core argument of the story. She's always working to prevent something from happening. So she justifies her violent actions to maintain power in a male-dominated drug cartel as survival strategy, highlighting the personal cost of her ambition. So she's always, anytime anybody tries to prevent her from doing something, then she goes and creates all kinds of havoc. Anytime anybody threatens her, she goes out. She's always working to prevent. Whereas the obstacle characters, which would be the opposite side of that argument, are arguing for pursuit. And in this case, it's not being driven to pursue more. Like, you have enough. Like, you don't need to go after more. So it's a lack of pursuit is pitted against always trying to prevent something. And then the argument of the narrative, they use each of the episodes, actually the totality of the entire series, to make the argument that if you maintain this and you keep your focus on this, or you keep pushing for this, it's going to end up in tragedy. That's why it's a meaningful story. Something like Fast and Furious, it's super fun. I love them. They drive around really fast and they blow things up, but it's just entertainment. There's no real greater meaning behind it, no greater message behind what it is that it's trying to get across. So when I say, oh, write a meaningful story, or Subtxt helps you write a meaningful story, what it does, not only does it teach you how all this stuff works, but it also helps you organize and bring a little bit of order to all the chaotic ideas you have. So all your story ideas, everything that's up in your head, is all chaos. It's all random stuff, sounds super cool. Then when you go to put it down on paper, or whatever it is, however you're delivering it, you need to bring some sort of order to it. That's actually a pair, order versus chaos. You need both, but bring a little bit of structure to it so that then you can organize and write something that makes sense to everybody, because you can't be in the room with everybody that's going to either read your book, play your game, watch a movie, whatever it is. So you need to make sure that the meaning of your story is encoded into all the different scenes, all the different acts, all that kind of stuff. And the Storyform helps you convey that meaning. Even something as fun and seemingly just a character piece for Griselda here actually had something deeper that it was working towards. And authors, even if they're not even trying to do this, if they're good authors, they're naturally going to gravitate towards this thing here, the Storyform, because they naturally know that they're trying to get something across. And whether or not they intend to or not, they are projecting a perspective, a particular way of seeing the world and of resolving inequity and resolving conflict. They're working towards that. And so whether or not they mean to or not, they're going to have a story form. The clearer the story form is, the clearer everything relates to one another here. So all these things are equally balanced. They all relate to one another. The clearer that is, the better the story. And that's why you go back to it and watch it again, or you tell somebody, wow, that was a really great story, because it was saying something more than just a bunch of robots like fighting each other, which is still super cool, especially if you've got a great soundtrack, but it still can be somewhat meaningless. So you'll see up here, the argument of Griselda, like I said, is she eventually changes out of this thing where she's always going after what it is that she's wanting, like she's driven for success. And then at the end, when she gives herself up, she is avoiding it. So she actually changes. She's like, fine, I'll eventually do that. Now, this one is a little more complex, because you may think, wait a second, didn't you just tell me she's a void, or she's motivated by a void, and the obstacle characters, her husband and the other guy she meets, is driven by pursuit? Totally. It's not black and white, especially if you're writing a story that's going to end up in failure. You're trying to show that when you change from this to that, it's going to end up in failure. She actually had the ability to have complete success, which would be to run away from everything a long time ago. She already had that sort of thing. But instead, she only did it at the end when it suited her and to keep her kids safe. And it was almost like too little, too late. And so she always had the thing that would make everything successful, but then she only kept it for herself at the end, which is why it was a tragedy. So the argument is almost that argument of like, well, even if you change, if you were all the time out in the outside world and dealing with everybody else, always trying to prevent, you're going to end up in this place that is not only a failure, but then also you're never going to resolve all those personal issues that you had. When you have something that ends in failure and the main character doesn't resolve whatever it is that they're going through, that is an argument. The author is making an argument. The meaning of the story is, hey, if you change and you go from this personally to avoid here and remove it from the outside world, it's going to end failure, bang. Everything's going to be destroyed. So that's why up here, what this is up here, this argument, the dramatic argument that I have that takes all of this stuff down here in the story form, because it occurred to me over the years, people would try and learn all this stuff, but they never understood, like, why the heck am I doing all this work? It's a ton of work. What does all this mean? So what it means is that this is a schematic, a blueprint for an argument. And it doesn't always have to be this way. It just so happens Griselda was a story of tragedy, a tragic story about all the stuff that happened in the 80s here. Taking all of this stuff here and reducing it down to its core elements, which would be this element, and then the consequence of everything, which is that everything changes and everything breaks. That is the message that you'll find in subtext, or the meaning of your story, and that's contained up here at the top. All this is this is a very reductive look at the meaning of the story. This is a very productive look at the narrative of the story. Again, that's another balanced pair between the two. This is very productive, tons of ideas. This narrows it down and is somewhat limiting and can kind of miss a lot of the nuance that's in there. But they're saying the same thing. When you destroy something in an effort to prevent something else from happening, everyone bears the tragic consequences. That's the argument. Now, what I super cool recently is had it explain in even more detail what this means. You know, for an author, this means constructing a story where characters are driven to make difficult decisions. This stuff is all rooted in the framework of this tragedy. It's teaching you, all right, well, if this is the kind of story you want to tell, this is what it means. And this is a way to work your way through it. That's why I love all this AI stuff. Not so that it can write your story for you and then it takes over everything and we have a bunch of awful robot stories. It's that it helps you get connected with what it is you're actually trying to say, challenge you to think, oh, okay, this is what I want to get across. This is my story. Oh, I feel really excited about this. Work with the AI back and forth to then really hone in on the meaning of your story. All right, that's it. Now you know exactly what it means when I say write a meaningful story. You know what meaning means, and you know that if you have a story and you want it to be lasting, you want it to be something that somebody reaches out and says, hey, you got to check this out. Or, hey, I watched this the other night. It was really, really great. Or I've been reading this book. It's fantastic. Know that everybody is looking for meaning within your work. Always, whether or not you know it or not. Narratives are one of the ways in which we are able to make sense of what it means to be us and what all this actually is about. So the more that you can help them along and provide them with the necessary touch points throughout your story so that they can put all the pieces together and understand, oh, this is what this author is trying to say, the more they will fall in love with your work and the better the world will be because we'll have better stories. So that's it for today. If you have any questions about this, or I need to make it even clearer, please leave a comment down below. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.